Welcome to Food for Thought, giving you the tools and resources you need to live according to your own values of compassion and wellness, joyfully, healthfully, deliciously, and sustainably. Today's episode is Italian cuisine from Tuscany, beans, biscotti, bread, and olive oil. I couldn't find an alliteration. Olive oil. And we cannot talk about Tuscany without talking about olive oil. Before we begin, my name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for joining me today. You can find me at joyfulvegan.com and on social media. You can find my books wherever books are sold. And you can join me in my online cooking classes, either on-demand classes or live virtual classes. You can also join me in my vegan trips around the world. You can find those trips at joyfulvegantrips.com. This podcast is 100% listener supported. So if you're a listener, you can support it. If it's something you value, please do join other supporters at patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can choose your level and you get perks depending on the level you choose. Perks including discounts to the virtual cooking classes, perks including bonus content, podcast transcripts, and more. And do not forget to share the love by leaving ratings and reviews of this podcast and sharing it with your network. Thank you so much. Welcome back to our culinary tour of Italy, vegan style. This episode is the third in a series of 4 celebrating the cuisine of Italy. It was originally supposed to be just 3 episodes, this series, but I split up central Italy. So if you want to pause this, stop this, and go back to the beginning, you can listen to the southern episode first where we did pasta, pizza, and produce. Then we moved up from the south, to central Italy, and we focused on forest, farms, and fungi. And now here we are still in the central part of Italy, but we're in Tuscany. In the central Italian episode, we focused on Abruzzo, Le Marche, Lazio, and Umbria. And today we're talking about Tuscany. I had to separate out Tuscany. It certainly merits its own episode, but that's not to say that any of the other regions do not merit their own episode. But really, I just didn't want to overwhelm you with more than I had already given you in that episode. And I wanted to do justice to Tuscany. So we could certainly have done every single region of the 20 regions in Italy, but then this podcast would be 20 episodes just on the specific regions in Italy. So I wanted to group them, which is a very typical way to group Italy, to compartmentalize Italy, to break it up, the south, the central part, and the north. All we did was split up central Italy, and today it's just Tuscany. And what I'm hoping is that you're starting to gain an understanding of kind of generally speaking, what the cuisine is in these different regions. And we've talked in the previous episodes about what makes the ingredients and the food characteristic in these regions. Some of it has to do with topography, some of it has to do with climate, some of it has to do with contact with other cultures. And so that is a way to think about why the cuisine is so different, and it is so different. Another takeaway I really hope you are paying attention to, what I'm really hoping you take away with, is because it's so regional and because there's such a pride of place in Italy, you're hearing that many of the dishes I name are something, of this place, the thing of this place, because there's such an emphasis on the fact that this cake, this pasta, this grain, this olive, it's from this place, this town, this region, this province. And that should really continue to emphasize for you how regional the cuisine of Italy is. And it's no different being here in Tuscany. So I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're taking some things away. These are generalizations, of course, but but some of them are they're there for a reason. So I'm so thrilled you're interested in this. I've been getting such great feedback from so many of you who are sending it on to your Italian family and who've been really enjoying it. So I hope I'm doing it justice. Of course, sono Italiana, as I've talked about. I am Italian in blood, but I didn't grow up Italian in my home. I grew up Italian in my culture in New Jersey with a lot of Italian Americans. That's a region in the United States where there are a lot of Italian Americans. And I've always loved Italian culture. I've always loved Italian food. I've always loved the Italian language. I love Italian film. I listen to Italian opera. So it has been a part of my just consciousness for a very long time. So it's really fun being able to talk about la cultura, la lingua, il cibo. Il cibo is the food because it's so amazing, which you already know. It's such an incredible place. Amo Italia. I love Italy, and it's an incredible country. And I hope you can join me. We have our joyful vegan trips under the Tuscan sun. There's a reason we keep going back to Italy. So you can go to joyfulvegantrips.com and you can see the itinerary and you can book your trip and you can enjoy this cuisine and the sun and the food and the wine and the olive oil and everything we're going to talk about today by coming to Tuscany with me or on your own, obviously. But it'd be super fun to have you join us. So if you're following along, you'll notice that even though we've covered a ton of foods and ingredients and produce and fruits and vegetables and grains, right, and specific dishes specific to the regions of southern Italy and central Italy, we haven't yet talked about an entire group of plant foods prevalent in Italian cuisine. And that's fagioli, beans. We haven't talked about beans. Not really. We talked a little bit about beans when we talked about ceci, chickpeas, when we were in southern Italy. And we talked a little bit about lentils, lenticchie in Umbria, but we haven't really talked about beans. And Tuscany is famous for beans. It's famous for its bean production, so much so that the people in Toscana, in Tuscany, are affectionately called mangiafagioli, bean eaters, by the rest of Italy. So beans are a huge, huge staple in Tuscan cuisine. You know, you hear this expression. I hear people say, I've heard people say, it's said in Italy, it's said in outside of Italy that beans are the poor man's meat. Sure, you can say that. I mean, yes, okay, in the sense that they are accessible, they're affordable. Everyone in Tuscany grows their own beans, in this case, and specifically in Italy. Obviously, they're a high nutrient-rich food, high in protein, high in so many nutrients. And of course, they can be used in so many dishes because there are so many different kinds of beans with different flavor profiles, with different textures, different colors. And so sure, you can put it that way. I don't like putting it that way because I don't want to make it seem like beans are inferior to or replacement for animal-based meat. They are on their own an incredible group of foods. Legumi, which would include lentils as well, but just beans, fagioli, they're such good food, and they're so versatile, you know, from culture to culture and cuisine to cuisine. So it's no exception in Tuscany. Here in Italy, in Toscana, beans are prevalent. So let's dig into this most famous region in this beautiful country. I hope by this point you're excited about some other regions that you may not have heard of before, right? Tuscany is probably the most famous region in Italy. I said that it had like the best PR, Tuscany did. And I think when people think of Italy, I think most likely what comes to mind are its famous cities, for sure, Rome and Florence and Venice, Milan. I don't think a lot of people have been up north as much, but certainly Rome and Florence and Venice. Perhaps they think about some picturesque coastal villages on the Mediterranean, right? Like the Amalfi Coast. Maybe they think of the Adriatic on the other side, on the eastern side. Possibly, but I think when people think of quintessential Italy, they're really thinking about Tuscany. When they think of undulating landscapes and stone farmhouses and villas framed in cypress trees, those tall, wonderful Italian cypress trees. When they think of medieval hill towns with cobblestone streets and hills and grape vineyards and as far as the eye can see, and olive trees and olive groves as far as the eye can see, that's Tuscany. And I think that's what when people think of Italy, they're thinking of Tuscany. And for a good reason. It has had the best PR, and it's an incredible place. What I'm hoping is that you'll understand why Tuscany is Tuscany and why the South is the South and why the North is the North based on the landscape and as I've said, the topography and the climate, etc. Because that's why we can say Tuscan cuisine is X, and it is a very particular type of cuisine. And when you think about the cuisine of Tuscany, what I want you to think about, and that's why I've been calling each one of these episodes by names that would distill it for you: pizza, pasta, and produce in the South, and fungi, right? Mushrooms and forests and farms in the central part. We're still in the central part, so think about that as well. A lot of agriculture. That's where we're at here in the central part and in Tuscany. So yeah, think about those hills and those olive groves and those grapevines, which should then help you make the leap to, oh, what kind of cuisine? Cuisine with a lot of olive oil and cuisine with wine and a lot of other agricultural products. So let's go there. So many of the regions love to describe their food as peasant food, the povera cucina, which we've talked about a number of times. This is the food of the poor, again, as has been talked about so many times, because again, animal products are symbols of affluence and symbols of wealth. Vegetables, plant foods, beans, etc. It's food that the poor would only be able to afford and or grow themselves. So again, I'm calling it povera cucina because it has that history, and let's elevate it from there. And certainly the Tuscans have, and this is the food that I eat. This is the food that we eat as vegans, right? So sure, this is povera cucina, but of course it's sophisticated. It's not just rustic. It's sophisticated as well. It's seasonal, it's regional, it's fresh, it's food right from the land. And that's the case here. Tuscans seek out the best vegetables, the best fruit, the best oil, the best wine. And one of the things that characterizes the food in Tuscany is once they have the best of all of those components, they don't have to add much because they don't want to distract from the flavor of these quality ingredients. So the seasonings in this cuisine, they're pretty sparse. Sometimes maybe a little black pepper, a little salt, right? We're not in the South anymore, so you don't have this cacophony of spices from the Middle East and North African cuisines like you do in the South. It's very simple. Might be a little salt, might be a little black pepper, a drizzle of olive oil, minimum of fresh herbs, right? Sometimes not even salt. Right. So that's what I'm talking about here is like you have a really good tomato, let's say. You don't need much, and believe me, some of my favorite memories, and if you're listening and you've been on these trips, some of my favorite memories are when we just go to the local market, get some bread, get some tomatoes, get some olive oil. That's it. And I'm thinking of some hikes that we've done where we just put a bottle of wine in our backpack. We put a loaf of bread in our backpack and some tomatoes and maybe some basilico as well, some basil. But that's it. It's like, and I have memories. Like I'm not thinking of these rich meals from trips. My favorite meals and my favorite memories are these really simple experiences. And it's true. Salt is not always needed or used. In Tuscany, the bread is famously unsalted. Senza sale, unsalted. Senza sale nel pane. So we're going to come back to this because it's very different than when you have bread in other regions or in other countries where there's some salt. So we'll come back to it. But let's talk about the most famous product of this region that, of course, pairs well so beautifully with pane, with bread, and that's olive oil. Olio d'oliva. Olive oil, olive oil, olive oil. It's just like no other olive oil you've had. if you haven't had Tuscan olive oil, and you probably have had some imported. So a little history about Tuscany. This region, Tuscany is the region the Etruscans dominated before their civilization succumbed to the Romans and were essentially wiped out or integrated so much that we just don't have a way to really parse them out. So now what's interesting is we have some things left from them, including the word Tuscany. It is left over from the Etruscans. So we don't have much to go by about who the Etruscans were and what they ate. We have the Western alphabet that was handed down, was taken by the Romans from the Etruscans. So we have our Western alphabet. That's how we get our Roman alphabet, because the Etruscans had it, and they got it from the Greeks and the Phoenicians, et cetera, et cetera. So we have the Western alphabet that we can attribute to the Etruscans for sure. And we have them in the word Tuscany. So it comes from Latin Tuscanus, right? Belonging to the Tusci, that Tusci, a people of ancient Italy. And that word Tusci comes from Tuscus, right? And earlier before that, it was Truscus, so Truscus, which was a shortened form of Etruscus, Etruscan. So Etruscan is the word. That's what they would have called themselves. They would have called themselves Etruscans. And that word Tuscany is the word that we have left over from the word Etruscan, Tuscany. It's pretty difficult to glean much about them. We do know for sure, though, 100% that olive oil was a key commodity, even in their time. Their urban civilization reached its height in the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era. 6th century BCE, Etruscans were making olive oil. And listen, you can send me hate mail. You can send me your opinion. You can do... It's all good, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that Tuscany produces some of the best olive oil. It's certainly the most coveted, and it's definitely the most available around the world. So when I say that you've probably had it, you've definitely had Tuscan olive oil, but I want to talk about a particular characteristic of it so that you can really differentiate it from other olive oil. So wine is a major commodity in Tuscany, but it's not uncommon for a wine estate to also make olive oil. It is just hugely produced here in Tuscany. So you have this dual production between wine vineyards and olive groves, right? That has been practiced for centuries. And this is the case at I Pini. I Pini is our own villa. We take over on our Tuscany trips. It's right, you just see San Gimignano right there. And my favorite thing to do every morning, I shouldn't tell you this because if you come on the trip, then I'm going to see you out there. And it's my little secret, but I get up very early before anybody else wakes up and I go walk through first the olive groves on the property, and then it goes to the vineyards right beyond that while the sun is rising and the ancient village of San Gimignano just towers above, literally the towers. I can see all the San Gimignano towers. It's kind of magical. And that's very typical for estates to grow both olives and grapes for wine on the same property. Now, Tuscan olive oil is more on the pungent side. It's not buttery like other olive oils, which have their place and they're delicious, but olive oil from Tuscany is very pungent. It's that really green. It's very green. Green is the color I would describe, but it's also the flavor, very green, very grassy, very peppery, and it's my favorite kind of olive oil. It's very ripe tasting. It's so peppery that it can tickle your throat. That's how peppery it is. It's just ripe olives pressed right away, and oh my God, they're just so good. And so get yourself some Tuscan olive oil if you haven't, kind of differentiated it from other olive oil. And it plays obviously a central role in the cuisine, not just to cook with. It is used for cooking, but it's more often used as a condiment or a finishing touch to dishes like bruschetta, right? You've got your tomato and garlic, maybe some basil, bruschetta, or like one of the famous Tuscan bean soups, a cannellini bean soup, drizzle it right on the top there, or on panzanella, right? Drizzle it right on there. Or ribollita, which is a classic stew from Tuscany. And so ribollita, which I have a recipe for in Color Me Vegan, Panzanella, I have a recipe for in 30-Day Vegan Challenge. Bruschetta, I have a recipe for in the Vegan Table. I do. And ribollita means reboiled, bolita, boiled. Ribollita is basically like yesterday's soup that you just add things to and just kind of freshen it up, including bread, some olive oil, more beans, vegetables, etc. So that's ribollita, and it's absolutely delicious. So while you do cook with olive oil here, it's often used to just drizzle over a dish as a finishing touch. And when you've got this quality olive oil, that's all you need for a finishing touch. It's just absolutely fantastic, especially this quintessential green, peppery, fresh, grassy, ripe olive oil from Tuscany. Now, speaking of olive oil and more specifically olives, in my Southern Italy episode, I failed to mention my absolute favorite olive. So as I'm talking about olive oil, best olive oils in Tuscany, but my favorite olive is actually from Sicily. Now, when you think of olives in Tuscany versus Sicily, remember, Sicily or the South, tons of sun. You can grow those olives and they become huge and delicious. I mean, obviously after they're cured and fantastic, right? But they're big and you've got a lot of options because you don't have frost affecting the trees. And so you don't have to worry about that. In Tuscany, as you're getting farther north and the temperatures are lower and you do have the risk of frost, the olives tend to be harvested kind of on the earlier side so that they don't get affected by the frost, and which means they're smaller. So when I think of the eating olives, I really do think of the big, juicy, meaty olives from the South because those are the bigger ones. And then when I think of olive oil, I think of Tuscany, right? So does that make sense? So the olive that is my favorite olive is from Sicily. It's the Castelvetrano olive. Castelvetrano. Castel, Castelvetrano. Vetrano. Vetrano. And they are the best. They're gorgeous. They're huge. They're round. They're beautiful. They're famous for their green. I almost said their olive color. They're famous for their green color, and it's kind of, oh God, it's just such a pretty green. It's a very different green than, say, the green olives you've had in a jar with a pimento in it. Like, not even close. This gorgeous, kind of brighter green sage color. They're so beautiful. They're irresistible. They're buttery. They're sweet. They're meaty. They're amazing. And I will tell you, I did not like olives growing up at all. I only started liking and loving olives as an adult. Yep. So I think what were the two big things? Right. Mushrooms. You know that I was a mushroom hater for years. Shiitake were my gateway mushroom. I didn't like olives, and Castelvetrano was my gateway olive. It was the first time it was at a restaurant up in Napa, which no longer exists, but it was a restaurant up in Napa. It was like a restaurant, and then like there was a yoga studio. So really like a lot of Mediterranean cuisine, and they had Castelvetrano olives on the table. And I remember thinking, oh God, I don't like that. And David's like, just try one. And I was like, they're so beautiful that I wanted to try one. And I tried one and I was hooked. That was it. That was the beginning. And not only do I just like absolutely just covet and fantasize about Castelvetrano olives, but it led me to like other olives as well. And we were at a winery not long ago with some friends, one of whom had an aversion to olives just like I had. And we had ordered some Castelvetrano olives for the table, and somehow I was able to persuade him to try one, and he did. His wife was like, I can't even believe he's trying one. And he tried not just one, but two, and then three. And it was very exciting. So if you don't love olives, please try the Castelvetrano olive. You can find them in Whole Foods. You can find them in like the olive bar in so many places. Take your little jar with you and fill up that jar with these olives. They're incredible. So I had to just mention them because I completely failed to mention them when we were talking about Sicily, but back to Tuscany and its olive oil, which is divine. It's almost drinkable. It is divine. It really is. And so I mentioned that you'll find it drizzled on famous dishes like bruschetta, and bruschetta is Tuscany's most famous dish. So bruschetta, the history of bruschetta actually dates back also to the Etruscans. Also to the Etruscans. So they occupied the land between Rome and Tuscany. And they began dressing the local saltless bread, senza sale, saltless bread, and baking the slices in ovens. Now, they wouldn't have used tomatoes because remember, they don't come into the picture for a millennia, but they would drizzle a bit of olive oil on the bread before placing it in the oven. Now, today we might call that crostini or bruschetta, which comes from the word to toast. Bruschetta means to toast. And today, like then, most likely, the quality of the olive oil is paramount, as are the quality of the tomatoes and the garlic and the basil. So again, quality, right? Of quality ingredients. And so you just got this perfect dish in a bruschetta. Now, sticking with bread, and coming back to what I have said now a couple times, which is that the bread is unsalted in Tuscany. You might not think that's noticeable. It's noticeable. If you have bread that has not had salt added to the dough when it was rising, you can tell the difference. It's true. There's no salt in the bread in Tuscany, and you can tell. Now, there are many theories and legends about why this is the case, but basically, salt-free bread complements the regional cuisine, and it lets the flavors of that produce I keep talking about, like the aglio and the pomodori and the basilico, like all of those individual ingredients shine when the bread is not salted. So it just kind of, again, simple. Now, whether the bread is fresh or toasted or a day old, it's still the idea that you're just really focusing on the flavors of the quality ingredients you're using, including when you make my favorite Tuscan dish. You've heard me talk about panzanella before. Panzanella is just a bread pan. Panzanella is a bread salad, and it is unbelievable. Also, again, same thing, unsalted bread when you are just making crostini. Now, crostini just means little toasts in Italian, right? So you think about crostini, you probably just think about, a baguette maybe sliced and toasted. That's pretty much it. That's what crostini are. So crostini, they're just like small, thin slices of toasted bread, right? And then they're usually brushed with olive oil. Now, because day-old bread was often used to make crostini, and because the bread was obviously harder and a little stale, it had to be soaked in a liquid such as wine or the juice of fresh tomatoes to make it just more edible, just to make it more delicious and softer, which is what is done when you make panzanella. You soak the bread in basically like a combination of, the juice from tomatoes and some olive oil. Could be wine as well, could be vinegar. And today, crostini is just a very general term for any thinly sliced toasted bread topped with anything from olive oil, fresh herbs, garlic, olives, spinach, tomatoes, whatever the toppings are, doesn't matter. And they can be served as bar snacks, as appetizers, or in soups, next to soups, right? What have you. And sometimes they could just be served as a side dish, but they're very quintessential here in Tuscany. When we specifically put aglio e pomodori e basilico, we call it bruschetta. So bruschetta is just a variation of crostini that just happens to be topped with garlic, tomatoes, olive oil, and basil. But the topics can be anything, and what you've got is crostini, prevalent in Toscana. Okay? But buyer beware. This is a crostini that's typical in Toscana, but don't order crostini Toscani. Don't order it. You can order crostini when you're in Toscana, but don't order crostini Toscani because it's a well-known Tuscan appetizer, an antipasto, which is toasted slices of bread with a pate made from the liver of chickens. So you don't want chicken liver on your crostini, but that is a particular dish called crostini Toscani. So you're like, oh, but isn't that awful? I think it's terrible that is the name of a dish that you would think we could just make with, it could just be bruschetta. But no, crostini Toscana is a liver pate. You heard it here. You heard it here. But what you should keep your eye out for when you're in Tuscany is Crostini di Cavolo Nero. So Crostini di Cavolo Nero. Cavolo Nero, you've heard of it in the store here in the United States. It's a traditional Tuscan dish, the Crostini di Cavolo Nero, made with Cavolo Nero, which is the dark green Tuscan kale, that dark green, gorgeous Tuscan kale. Sometimes you might see just a Tuscan kale, but that's what the Cavolo Nero, it's a really dark green kale. On the crostini, it's the Cavolo Nero, so the kale, the olive oil, the garlic, salt, pepper. That's it. A little olive. I said the olive oil. Just that's it. Maybe you put a little, fresh herbs if you want. That's it. So that's your Cavolo, crostini di Cavolo Nero. So look for that. Don't look for crostini toscani. Okay. So it's delicious. It's also served as an appetizer, antipasto. So delicious. So simple. I want some now. I'm recording this right before lunch again. Big mistake. Big mistake. So you can make that at home, the crostini di Cavolo Nero, or you can enjoy it in Tuscany. Another traditional variety of bread made in Tuscany and in Umbria, you may not have heard of this one. It's called Skiachatta, and it's just flour, olive oil, yeast, water, and a little bit of sugar. It's similar to focaccia. So if you looked up Skiachatta right now, you'd probably get a picture that looked very close to focaccia. Very close to focaccia, but it's a little easier to prepare than focaccia. Skiachatta means pressed, and it refers to the process of pressing the dough with the fingers when it gets placed in the baking tins or pans. That's why you often see, picture focaccia, you often see those little indentations, the top of a focaccia. That's what we're talking about here for the Skiachatta, and that's what the word means. It's just it's referring to that pressing down of the dough in the pans. And the texture is very similar to focaccia. It's crunchy on the outside, soft and moist because of the olive oil, and it can be topped with anything from tomatoes to garlic to oregano, what have you. So enjoy the bread. Enjoy the bread. I would say it's not the kind of bread when you're in Tuscany that you just want to eat the way you would when you're in France, that you'd want to just take the pieces of the bread from the table. Because the bread in France, I think I prefer the bread just alone in France. No, I can't believe I'm saying that. Versus the bread alone in Tuscany. And I'm talking specifically about the bread in Tuscany. I'm not talking about bread in other parts of Italy because it's different. But it is the perfect bread for what we're describing, adding these fresh ingredients to it. It doesn't take away from any of those ingredients. Those ingredients stand on their own, and the bread is just a vehicle. But if you just like grabbed a piece of bread and dipped it in some olive oil, I mean, that would obviously be good, but I would probably sprinkle a little bit of salt on if I'm eating it that way. But that's not really how the bread's eaten in Italy. Okay. Let's move on to the food that gives Tuscans their nickname, Mangia Fagioli, and that is fagioli. Fagioli beans. There is no Tuscan vegetable garden without fagioli. Everyone grows their own beans, and there's no trattorie that doesn't serve them in soups or as a side dish. And remember, in Italy, trattoria are very casual restaurants. They tend to focus on takeout. So we see in the United States like trattoria, and we're like, oh, that's just an Italian restaurant. In Italy, trattoria, it's a very specific kind of restaurant. It's a very casual restaurant. And so, because they serve very basic, traditional, rustic food, you'll find that beans are everywhere. So if you are traveling to Italy for the first time and you're in Tuscany for the first time, pretty good bet that you'll be able to find some really nice, basic, delicious, simple food, cucina povera, in trattorie. Okay. So even though we associate beans with Italy, and I think more specifically with Toscana, of course, if you're thinking, wait a second, wait, what? Beans are native to the New World, right? So they did not originate in the Mediterranean. They originated in the New World, and they were brought to Rome allegedly by 1515. We have evidence that beans were brought to Rome by 1515 and Tuscany by 1528. So pretty early on. They went from Rome to Tuscany pretty quickly. And ever since then, they have been grown in Italy. And there are many varieties, many varieties. If you want to really dive deep, just do some research on kind of different Italian beans. But also if you're interested in heirloom beans and you're in the United States, there's a wonderful, especially California, there's a wonderful company called Rancho Gordo, and their beans, they focus on heirloom beans from different countries, and it could be South American, Central American, Mediterranean, Italian, Spanish countries, and they basically have the root stock that from these countries, and then they grow these beans here in California, and the beans are just unbelievably fresh and delicious and fantastic. And if you want to get your hands on some of these beans without importing them from another country, check out Rancho Gordo, RanchoGordo. But the most famous bean from Tuscany, you can find anywhere, but if you really want the best, I would definitely say get them imported. But it's more than just getting the cannellini bean. There are many different types of cannellini bean, and there are many different types of white beans. So cannellini bean, we tend to call them just white kidney beans, and that's true, they are. They're white kidney beans. But there are many varieties, many more than you would expect, because we're just used to I'll have that white bean, I'll have that cannellini bean, I'll have that kidney bean, I'll have the pinto bean. But there's just so much more to say about beans. I think I have to do a whole episode just on beans because they're so special, and I think they need their own episode. But one type of cannellini bean is from Tuscany. Obviously, cannellini beans are Tuscan beans, but one type of cannellini bean is known as the Sorana. Sorana, and it has protected status. We talked about protected status in the Central Italy episode, where it means that some specific types of produce have protected designation of origin status, denominazione di origine protetta, DOP for short. Now you'll see DOC and DOCG mostly related to wine, but specifically for produce, you will see DOP. DOC is Denominazione di Origine Controllata, and then DOCG is Controllata e Garantita, so controlled and guaranteed. So they're basically quality standards, and so you'll know what this means when you see DOP or Denominazione di Origine Protetta on a label. You'll know it means it's food imported from Italy, and it's a certification that confirms that the products are locally grown, locally made, and it ensures that the product is authentic, that it's made and grown by Italian farmers or Italian artisans in the case of other kinds of products. So the Sorana bean has this status because even though as early as the 19th century, the beans grown around Sorana, so of course, it's a town. It's actually a ridiculously picturesque village in Toscana. So just type in Sorana village in your little Google machine, and it's so gorgeous. It's so picturesque. So these beans grown around Sorana, they were recognized for their high quality as early as the 19th century. But because of the world wars, both World War I and World War II, which wreaked havoc on so many European countries, obviously, including Italy, depopulation of that area meant that cultivation of the Sorana bean had nearly ceased by the 1980s, and people took up this mantle and brought it back. And so by 1994, the bean was in danger of becoming extinct, and now it has protected status. So they took up this mantle, they saw that it was going to become extinct, and they protected this bean. And so now today it's considered so economically important to the survival of agriculture in the Pescia Valley, that's where this village is, that it's believed to actually help prevent emigration today. That's how significant this bean is. That's how significant agriculture is in Italy, and why the regions are why it's so specific. So do a search for the Sorana bean, but for the village of Sorana, so you can see how picturesque it is. It's between Lucca and Florence, And it's now on my list of places to go when we're in Tuscany next. Like, it's so amazing. Like, this region is small enough. This country is obviously small enough, but this region is small enough that when you come on a trip with us, you can add extra days on either end of the trip to see more. So on our Tuscany trips, we start in Florence for instance. So a lot of folks come a few days early, obviously to acclimate to the time change and to hang out in Florence because, I don't know, Florence, Firenze, è bella. And it's just filled with history. I mean, you just have to spend time there. And please go to the Uffizi gallery, the Uffizi Museum. It's just incredible. But if you do plan to do that, get tickets as soon as you book your flight. Get tickets for the Uffizi because it sells out. And especially, if as things are opening up post COVID or in the new iteration we are in COVID, more and more people are going to be there. More and more people are going to get tickets, and you don't want to miss out. The Uffizi is quite amazing. So then after our meeting in Firenze, we then head out to our villa, and we're at that villa the entire time. The villa I keep mentioning, I Pini, it literally is right outside of San Gimignano. You can see a view of it from our villa. It's quite incredible. And we visit Siena and Volterra and Creti Senesi and Pienza and Assisi. We go to Umbria for that. A winery, an animal sanctuary, so much more. But we haven't been to Lucca yet. And so we plan on spending a couple days before our trip. So even if our itinerary, if you're like, oh, the itinerary doesn't have Lucca, you could just head over to Lucca. It's like a hop, skip, and a jump. And because trains are so good in Europe, it's just really easy for you to add a couple other things to your itinerary. And I am going to add Sorana because it looks absolutely incredible. So at least these days we can still enjoy these foods if we don't go to the place because we can get them imported. So if you don't go to Sorana, you don't go to Toscana, at least order some of these beans, the Sorana beans. I mentioned Rancho Gordo. I have a feeling they can't call the bean. So they're not just selling beans, right? They're not just selling imported beans. What they're doing is actually, like I said, growing the heirloom beans from a seed stock from the places wherever they come from. In this case, from Sorana, from Italy, from Tuscany, they get that seed stock and then they grow it here in California. So they're keeping that seed stock alive here in California. So it's not a matter of just going to the website and being like, oh, I'm going to order some imported beans. No. Rancho Gordo is actually growing the beans and then selling them, right? My point is, if you go to the Rancho Gordo website, if you want, for instance, if you want to import the beans from Italy, that's fine too. But I'm just giving you an example here at Rancho Gordo. If you go to their website, you won't find Sorana beans. And I have a feeling they can't call them Sorana beans, just like you can't call, you can't call a sparkling wine champagne unless it's made in Champagne. I have a feeling they can't just call them Sorana beans because they are not Sorana beans, but they have their own stock. They have their own bean that they call the Marcella bean. Now, if you typed in Sorana in the Rancho Gordo website, you'll find the Marcella bean. So their Marcella bean is their California Sorana bean that's grown from the Italian Sorana seed stock, but I think they can't call it Sorana bean for that reason. It's the Marcella bean. So they named it after, I think, a family member or something like that, Marcella. So all that's to say is get yourself some beans, the Sorana bean, whether it's just directly from Italy, or the Marcella bean if you want to go over to Rancho Gordo. And I'm only telling you this because I just love Rancho Gordo. This is not sponsored or in any way paid for by Rancho Gordo. Probably should go consider that. But I just want to tell you about things I love. So there you have it. There are other popular beans in Tuscany. I'll mention another one that I think you've heard of. There's probably some you haven't heard of, but if you just, again, are going to an import store and you want to get some other Tuscan white beans, Toscanello, Schiaccioni, I don't think we've heard of them in the United States as much, but one that you probably would have heard of is the Corona bean. I think, maybe. Corona bean is one of my favorite beans. Like, I could live on these beans. Corona bean, absolutely amazing. They're really big. They're large, broad, white beans, common to Italy, not commonly grown in regions around the world. Common to Italy, typically, right? It's similar in appearance to a large lima bean, and but it's not. It's a Corona bean. Really meaty, becomes much larger when cooked. So good in soups, so good in stews, so good served as a side dish, just like all white beans in general. All of the white beans I'm talking about, the cannellini, the sorana, which is just a type of cannellini, the corona, they're all just so fantastic in soups. The dishes I mentioned, the Tuscan bean soup, the ribollita we discussed, just so fantastic in any kind of soup, any kind of cucina povera soup, right? Just delicious. There's another one called the Farinata di Cavolo Nero. It's basically a soup with the Cavolo Nero, kale and the carrots and celery and onions. A very typical minestrone. I mean, it's quintessential minestrone. Minestrone is a quintessential Italian soup. It's just a soup with local vegetables from the area and olive oil and cannellini beans. That would be a minestrone in Toscana. Now, minestrone varies by season and it varies by region. In the northern region of Lombardia, you've got minestrone, which might include pasta, might include winter squash, right? Farther south in Tuscany, as I mentioned, you've got the cannellini beans with kale. In the coastal city of Genoa, in the region of Liguria, you would have the minestrone finished with pesto. We're going to get there when we get to the north. Minestrone just basically means a vegetable soup with regional vegetables. That's what it means. Another well-known bean-based soup dish in Tuscany is Fagioli Al Uchileto, and it's basically baked beans. So it's beans with, they're sauteed in some garlic and sage and tomatoes, and absolutely delicious. So yeah, cucina povera, sure. The poor man's food, the poor man's meat. Ugh. To me, it's just the most delicious food. It's just simple. It's just simple and delicious. White beans, beans, vegetables, regional, seasonal. You can't go wrong. Now, we talked about grains a little bit when we talked about Umbria. So if you're interested in some more grains, go back to the Central Italy episode and listen to the episode there. And I talk about it in Umbria. In Umbria, we talked about farro. Now, farro is grown in Umbria. It's also grown in Tuscany. And farro, I'm sure you've had, I always think about farro as like a chewier version of a barley and a tastier version of barley. Just a wonderful grain. Also great for soups and stews, etc. So that's here as well. You also have a street snack here in Tuscany, in this kind of central area, called Torta De Chechi. Now, we talked a little bit about chickpeas down in the south, but now what you have up in Tuscany is something called Torta di Chechi. Remember, Chechi means chickpea. But you also have Farinata. It's called Farinata as well, which is famous in Lucca. Lucca is a beautiful Tuscan town, which we're going to go to when we go this June. And we're talking about basically chickpea flour pancake. It's like a socca. So farinata, torta de ceci, socca, that's the same thing. It's basically a chickpea flour pancake. And it is one of the most delicious items on our daily breakfast spread in our villa in Tuscany. Every day we get a farinata depends on whatever they add to it. Like every day there's different ingredients. And it's the kind of food, socca, I have a socca in the 30-day vegan challenge. If you haven't had socca, it's kind of food like you want to eat it that day. You don't keep it hanging around. You eat it that day. And so every day for breakfast in our Tuscan villa, we get a torta de ceci, and it's different every day. So it's not the leftover from yesterday. That's basically what this is, a flat bread, pancake, however you want to think about it, from chickpea flour. And yes, chickpea flour was used long before vegans were trying to figure out a way to have the consistency of scrambled eggs without chicken's eggs. It's a staple here in Tuscany, so you can look for that. Farinata or torta de ceci. So even though you have beans, the chickpea themselves, the ceci, that's used more in southern Italian cuisine. So you'd find the ceci in soups more, whereas you find the beans from Tuscany up in the soups more in Tuscany. But ceci, you would find it more as the flour here in Toscana, the torta di ceci. Okay, and farro as a whole grain. You'd find that here. Okay. Moving on to another grain-based food is pasta, right? Which is the wheat-based food. But not all pasta, like a gnocchi isn't necessarily, you don't necessarily have to have flour. But basically, let's move on to another grain-based food that is quintessential here in the region of Toscana, and that's pasta in this region. Now, in central Italy, as I said, we're straddling the south. As I said in the Central Italian episode, we're straddling the south and we're straddling the north when we're in the central part, obviously. So what you'll find is when it comes to pasta, because we're straddling the south and the north, in the south, most pastas are not made with eggs. In the north, most pastas are. In the central part, you kind of find sometimes pasta's made with eggs, sometimes not. So just ask. So what are the famous pastas and the famous pasta dishes here in Toscana? You've got potato tortelli di patate, which is a potato stuffed tortelli. Sometimes you'll find that vegan. On our trips, you always find it vegan, but sometimes you'll find it not. There's a particularly well-known tortelli recipe that hails from Mugello in Toscana. It's called, this is the takeaway I want you to have, it's called, you're never going to guess, tortelli di patate del Mugello, right? So again, these dishes from this area, tortelli del Mugello. It's of Mugello. It's a fantastic example of the rustic, hearty cooking found in this region. So potato tortelli you'll find here in Toscana. Another well-known type of pasta, David's actually been buying this. We had this quite a bit when we were in Toscana, is pici. P-I-C-I. I don't know. I just somehow the word, the pronunciate, like Chechi is one of my favorite words. Pici. And actually Pichi is my nickname for my cat. Her name's Michiko and I call her Michi. Michi Pichi. All the time. And it comes from this word, appiccicare, which just means to stick. And so they're eggless noodles. So if you find pici pasta with eggs, that's not really conventional. Like you would traditionally find pici as an eggless pasta. So they're hand-rolled dough. The dough is hand-rolled into really extra thick strands, and then they're cut up. They're kind of like a thicker spaghetti. And I really like them. And I'm very particular about the pasta I eat. I don't love all pastas, but I do like pici. And this pasta can be served with a vegan meat. It tends to be served with a meat sauce, but let's just say, we'll say our vegan meat. But also mushrooms. Mushroom-based sauces is very typical for pici. But the most typical way to enjoy pici in Toscana is very simply, actually, not surprisingly, and it's a well-known dish from the Tuscan region, and it's called pici alle briciole. Pici alle briciole, and it means, it's basically breadcrumbs, pici with breadcrumbs. So briciole means. So it's a dish that originated around Siena, and it's another example of typical cucina povera cuisine, right? The cucina povera, the simple cuisine. And you have just your typical ingredients. You've got your olive oil, your garlic, your hot red peppers, and day-old Tuscan bread, and handmade pici pasta. It's, again, simple, perfect, just as it is. You don't need a lot. It's just fantastic. So pici alle briciole. And remember, if you're a supporter, you'll get this transcript, so you'll get all of this written down for you. There's also an interesting type of pasta specific to this region that I have not tried before, and I'm going to make it because it sounds so delicious, and that's chestnut gnocchi. Now, it's one of the original gnocchi varieties, and this gnocchi is traditionally prepared with a combination of wheat flour and chestnut flour, although some combinations occasionally apparently include mashed potatoes, right, which a potato gnocchi is pretty typical. But we're going to be talking more about chestnut flour when we wrap up with sweets. But I am really eager to try this type of gnocchi. Gnocchi is so fantastic to make at home. It is not difficult to make at home. And I'm testing so many recipes because of my new cookbook. I've already put out the call for people. If you want to be a recipe tester, if you're interested, drop me a line at support@joyfulvegan.com and put recipe tester in the subject line. And I will give you all the details to see if you're interested, to know what's involved, what it entails. But I'm very excited, and I'm constantly testing recipes all the time. But this one just sounds so intriguing. It's just basically similar to gnocchi, But what distinguishes it from other gnocchi is that it has this kind of light brown color from the chestnut flour. And again, you would just have like chestnut gnocchi, and then you would have it paired with like some olive oil, maybe some grated vegan cheese, some pesto, or some tomato-based sauces. Very basic, very Toscana, very Tuscan, right? And finally, for our pastas, a pasta that is believed to be the first type of pasta ever produced, dates back to ancient Rome, is testaroli. Testaroli, Testaroli, testaroli. It's a unique variety of Italian pasta. If you look it up online so you can see what it looks like. It's interesting. It's kind of flat. It's basically flour, water, and salt, and you prepare the pasta like as a big pancake, and then you cut it into smaller pieces. They could be triangles, they could be diamonds, they could be squares, and then you boil the pasta in water, and it's traditionally paired with pesto. Also can be paired with ingredients you're never going to guess: olive oil and garlic. Aglio, which by the way sounds very close to olio. So aglio, Aglio, is garlic, and olio d'oliva. So it's the oil from the olive, right? So that's what it's paired with. Delicious. Now, we talked briefly about pappardelle pasta in the previous episode. If you remember, it's the long ribbon pasta, but it's often made with chicken's egg, so buyer beware. And there are a lot of meaty pasta dishes in Toscana. We have them veganized on our trips, but we don't need to talk about them here. I'm not going to talk about every meaty dish that you could just use vegan meat for. What I want to do, what I'm trying to do in all these episodes, is to show you how many dishes, how many cuisines that are traditional in these different regions that don't use any animal products at all. Sure, I've mentioned a couple. You can use a vegan meat sauce and a whatever, right? Or baking, you're going to want to use obviously a vegan butter. But for the most part, I want to show you that we're talking about cucina povera. We're talking about cuisine that is meant to be made without animal products to begin with. So hopefully you were inspired to make some of this at home. So let's end with what I think is a fitting way to end, with dolci, with sweets famous in Toscana. And first of all, you've got Panforte. It's a popular chocolate cake hailing from Siena. And I remember when I was writing The Joy of Vegan Baking, which would be now, how many years ago? I have to do the math. 2022, I think 2006, 16 years ago. And I included a Panforte because I wanted to include it because it's from Siena, and I talk about it in the book. And so you can still find that Panforte in the Joy of Vegan Baking. I use agave. They do use honey, but it's a wonderful, wonderful sweet that dates all the way back to the 13th century in Siena. It's filled with almonds and candied fruits. And as I said, I use agave instead of honey. There's another famous treat from Siena. I don't know that you've heard of it. It's a type of cookie or biscuit if you're in the UK, called Ricciarelli D Sienna, of course. Ricciarelli D Sienna. And that dates back to the 14th century. So when I think about that cookie, the reason I'm mentioning it is because you would basically have these soft almond cookies, biscuits, right? They would also have been known, these cookies, the Ricciarelli, would have also been known as marzapanetti alla senese, right? So from Siena, marzapanetti, and if you can hear in the word there, it's almond paste. So marzipan, almond paste. And almonds were grown around this region, in this region of Siena, for a long time. They still are. But these cookies would only have been really served by royalty, people with a lot of money, because almonds and almond paste, marzipan, was precious and expensive and only sold in like very high-end apothecaries. It was considered an exotic spice. But today you will find a lot of kind of almond-flavored, almond-based desserts in this region because almonds are widely grown here. And what you have in this region, in addition, is in Tuscany, it's the birthplace of biscotti. Biscotti. Now, biscotti just means twice baked by bis, B-I-S, and cotti means cooked. So twice cooked. Biscotto is a singular, so don't go saying, I would have one biscotti, please. You'd say one biscotto, and biscotti is plural. So you've got biscotti. Tuscany is the birthplace of biscotti, but you have a very special one because the birthplace of biscotti in Tuscany was Prato, Prato. Prato. So what you have is Biscotti di Prato. So now you get this, right? Just name a dessert, and if it's from that area, it will be called that dessert or that dish from that area. Biscotti di Prato. And Prato is a town in Tuscany where the almond groves are abundant. So you have a traditional almond flavor. The Biscotti di Prato, they're almond biscuits, almond cookies. And like a lot of, like the origins of fruitcake, for instance, biscotti was first created to be a long shelf life food for Roman legions. So the Roman legions, who would be traipsing all around the Roman Empire, they would need food to be able to carry with them during lengthy battles and these lengthy trips. And so biscotti, because it was very intentionally rock hard. I mean, if you think about biscotti, even the biscotti you eat today, right? It's twice cooked. That's literally what it means. And it's harder, and that's why you dunk it. A lot of people, I think in other places, dunk it in cappuccino. I don't know. I've never had cappuccino, but I know that that's the case. And so it would be dipped in cappuccino and it softens it a bit. But the idea was to have it rock hard because the Roman legions needed something to stick around for a long time. It didn't become stale or inedible. And the original almond flavoring gave nutrients, gave flavor to the Roman legions, to the soldiers. So that's what you have. And that's why you have this biscotti. And you have another type of biscotto called Bruti Mabuoni. I love that name. I've never had it, but I'm going to try this. It just basically means ugly but good. Bruti Mabuoni. Ugly but good. And that's another type of biscotti. Now, in Tuscany, you can dip your biscotti into cappuccino, but it wouldn't be really traditional there. In Toscana, in this area, you would most likely find Tuscans dunking their biscotti in a local sweet wine called vin. I almost said vin, like it's French. Vin Santo. So Marsala wine would be another one, or Vin Santo. They're the wines of choice for dipping the biscotti. Or you could dip it in cappuccino. I'm not going to tell anybody. And then finally, our final dessert, our final food from Tuscany. There's lots of other foods. I'm trying to give you the best and the most known and the most veganized and the most veganizable. But we have another typical Tuscan dessert called castagnaccio. And castagnaccio is made with chestnut flour. So chestnut flour, you can see, is pretty prevalent in this region because it's grown in this region. Chestnuts are grown in this region. And it's really fun because it's more of a savory sweet. It's more of a savory dessert. It's made with raisins and pine nuts and walnuts and rosemary. It's a cake. I'm working on a recipe for this. I really am working on a recipe for this because I am intrigued by it. And it's also just naturally gluten-free because it's made with chestnut flour. And it has this I've had it, I just haven't made it. It has a wonderful nutty, earthy flavor. So stay tuned. I'm working on it. But you can find chestnuts and different chestnut foods, desserts. Again, they're more savory, but they're also sweet. You find that a lot more in the Umbrian and Tuscan desserts. There's a polenta porridge made with chestnut meal, something the Romans ate long before the introduction of corn. Remember, corn didn't come in until it was brought from the New World by the Spanish. And so you didn't have maize. You didn't have polenta made with corn. You made polenta, which think of polenta as just a porridge. So polenta would have been made with chestnut flour. And so you had this chestnut porridge, and you still see that in Corsica. There's a Corsican variety of polenta called polenta, and it's made with sweet chestnut flour. And even though we're not focusing on wines, and there's no way I would do justice to the wines of Italy, I have to mention, of course, the ubiquitous Chianti. Chianti is the wine that you will find from Toscana. Brunella di Montecino is another, and Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. So you'll find these three wines, and Vernaccia di San Gimignano, which is right across from us. I mean, this is what it is. You're eating the food that's grown. Just you could see the farm. You're drinking the wine that you can see the vineyards. You're eating the olive oil. You could see the groves. Like that's how you eat in Italy, and it is so inspiring. How can you not be inspired by that? I am, obviously. And so Vernaccia di San Gimignano is also DOCG protected. So it's another protected food, grape. In this case, wine has to be made a very particular way, and it's so unique and so interesting. And so I will tell you that it's been really fun. David and I live in California. We do love our wine, and we there's certain wines that I really prefer. My favorite is a California Zin. I just love Zinfandel. And, you know, it's actually a Croatian grape, but that was mastered here in California. So it's a very quintessential California wine, and I love it. It's my favorite. And there's an area of Sonoma County called Dry Creek. If you travel to the San Francisco Bay Area, go up to Sonoma, go up to Dry Creek, and some of my favorite wineries are up in Dry Creek. They specialize in growing Zinfandel. Now, we're not experts by any stretch, but we know our California wines pretty well. And just last year, 2 years ago, I think it was during COVID, I wanted to learn more about European wines. And so I started watching great courses on wine. And the first episode in, I was like, David has to join me for this because it's going to be so much fun if we do this together. And we watched this entire course, like not even drinking we weren't drinking the wines while we were learning. We were just learning and kind of absorbing and understanding European wines because we knew pretty much next to nothing. We knew nothing. We know California wines. We knew nothing about French wines, Italian wines. I mean, you know some grapes. You're like, okay, a Cab Sauv is a French grape. You know, it's a Bordeaux. You know, there's a Burgundy. I knew a little bit. So that's why I said next to nothing. I knew pretty much nothing. Italian wines, forget about it. Like I knew nothing except for like Chianti. Like and I only knew that there was a thing called Chianti. And I knew I didn't like it. Because it's very different than a California Zin. And so we started exploring and we started studying, as it were, literally learning and reading and watching and etc. And we started drinking them. And so it's been such a wonderful endeavor because we really understand. Like my God, like have increased my knowledge of European wines. And it also means Spanish wines, although we're really focused on French and Italian. And we're doing some other New World wines like in New Zealand and Australia. Where else? What am I missing? Any South American. We're mostly focused on Italian and French. And by goodness, that's not by God, by golly, by gosh, by golly, we've learned so much. And so there's a distributor here in San Francisco that specializes in imported wine. It's called K&L, and you can order it from K&L even if you don't live in California, but they're right here. Like they just drop it off at our door, and we get wines from them that are from Italy. And we've just really learned to appreciate and understand the wines in the different regions of Italy. Now, like with the food, at least I'll speak for myself. I'm someone who learns by my senses, right? And so you're more apt to understand and remember the wines or the food, the produce, etc., when you're there in the region. And so the wine is no different than the food when it comes to Italy. You're in Toscana, you drink wines from Toscana. You drink Chianti, you drink Brunello di Montalcino, you drink Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, you drink Vernaccia di San Gimignano. Like you drink the wines that are from the regions because you can see the vineyards right on the other side of that hill. And it's just incredibly inspiring, and it's been a lot of fun. So I do not feel equipped or in any way qualified to do any episodes on wine. But I wanted to share that with you because it's very similar to the food, and it's very regional, and a lot of it's protected. You have a lot of DOCG and a lot of DOC. So those are the takeaways. The takeaways that like really understanding like how specific this food is to the regions we're in. This wasn't just like an exercise because it's fun. Like, oh, let's just break up Italy randomly. No, like there's a reason we have the foods there's a reason we can say that's a Sicilian X and that's a Tuscan Y and that's an Umbrian Z, right? There are reasons for that. And we haven't even talked about. This is what I hope you're also taking away. So taking away how regional everything is, how specific, the pride of place, the name of the place in so many of the dishes we're talking about that'll help you remember some of them as well. If it's anything, it's of that place. If it's like I said, the Biscotti di Prato, it's the Biscotti of Prato, like it's this pride of place, right? So that's something I'm hoping you're taking away. And what I hope you're also taking away is how broad and vast this food that we know and we love so much is. And we haven't even talked about risotto, polenta, penne, pesto, ciabatta, lasagna, ravioli, tiramisu, panna cotta. Like these are dishes that are specific to the North. We haven't even talked about, and I know you know all those things. I know you love a good pesto. I know you love a good ciabatta. It's my favorite bread. My favorite bread is ciabatta. Polenta is my favorite Italian cuisine, period, full stop, right? We haven't even talked about, I've mentioned polenta in the sense of like a porridge made with other things, but like polenta, it's served in the North. And we're also going to talk about the fact that as we get a little farther north, definitely a lot more animal products. But we can do it. And that's why I do these episodes. And that's why we do these trips so that you can come to the places around the world and enjoy what any non-vegan would enjoy with no deprivation, nothing missing at all. So in our Northern Italian trip, which is sold out for this year, but we'll do it again. Our Northern Italian trip, we're having all the cuisine of the Northern Italians. We're just not having animal products. And you're not missing a thing. You're not missing a thing. So I can't wait to get there. We're going to get there next in the series. It'll be the 4th in the series. Always interested to hear what you're interested in. If there's other things you want me to talk about related to Italian cuisine or other cuisines, very much love to hear from you. If you listen and enjoy any of these, please become a supporter. You can become a supporter at $5 a month. If every person who downloaded this episode became a supporter at $5 a month, I wouldn't have to ask every single time. You get the transcripts and you get the satisfaction of keeping this podcast on the air. We're in its 16th year. 16 years I've been doing this podcast. So please consider becoming a supporter by going to patreon.com. Check out my cookbooks. I will tell you a story in the next episode. But Color Me Vegan and Vegan Table and Vegan's Daily Companion will no longer be printed. So go, if you can now, find the remaining copies that are in print. I'm going to figure out what to do with these recipes in these books because I'm not going to let them just go away. But the publisher just doesn't want to print any more of the books because they're saying it's just too expensive and they're not selling enough to justify the printing. So the good news is I'm going to get the rights back for all of these recipes. They will be mine. And the good news is I won't have these books. The good news is I'll be able to do with these recipes what I want. The Joy of Vegan Baking is still going to be printed. It's still the bestseller of all the books, but Vegan Table, Color Me Vegan, Vegan's Daily Companion. If you go to Amazon right now, you can see that there's just used copies for sale. So that's another thing I have to work on is what to do with these recipes. But that's why when I say support, supporting my work is really meaningful. It is really meaningful because this is what I do it for, to put it out there to you. I don't just do it because for its own sake. So the trips, the cooking classes I do, we've got some great cooking classes coming up. We've got burgers and buns. We've got brunch. We've got bûche de Noël. They're all B's. I didn't mean that on purpose, but burgers and buns. We have a brunch class and a bûche de Noël class. We also have the Tuscany trip. We have a Rwanda trip. We have the Tuscany class is an on-demand Tuscany class. If you want some Tuscan cuisine, go to the on-demand part of joyfulvegan.com. And just experience, I hope you're experiencing through this episode and through the work that I do, that this is all about living compassionately and healthfully, but with joy and with abundance. There's no dearth of any of that here. We're not missing anything. We're just experiencing the flavors and the abundance that is available to us. So that is my hope for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.